Colorado Territory, 1874. The wind dragged dust across the parched ground outside the trading post in Delaney Fork, and Odessa Clarke gripped the worn blue blanket tighter, the one her baby had been wrapped in when he was still warm in her arms. Now it was all she had left of him. She stood near the porch rail, sun on her back, her thin dress fluttering against her legs. The blanket was soft from use, edges frayed. She had not wanted to part with it. But her stomach had not stopped aching for days, and her last coin had gone to feed her daughter 2 nights ago. "I can trade this," she said quietly to the shopkeeper, who barely glanced up from his ledger. "Not much good to me," the man muttered, scratching behind his ear with his pencil. "You got anything else worth taking?" "No," she whispered. The man shrugged, already turning away. "Then I cannot help you." She turned to leave, eyes stinging, and that is when she saw him. A tall man in a trail-dusted coat, hat pulled low, horse reins in one hand. He looked like he had just come down from the divide, boots muddy, jaw rough with days-old stubble. His shirt clung to the sweat on his back, and his eyes, when they met hers, were a gray that caught the light like iron. He stopped mid-step when he saw her, saw the blanket trembling in her hands. "You selling that?" he asked, voice low but clear. Odessa nodded once. He stepped closer, slow, like he was afraid too fast might break something. "What for?" "I need food," she said, the words cutting out of her like splinters. He looked down at the blanket, then back at her. "Keep it," she blinked. "What?" The corner of his jaw clenched, but his voice stayed gentle. "Keep it. I will bring you food." Her arms curled around the blanket before she could stop them. "Why?" He tipped his head toward the little girl sitting on the bench behind her, barefoot, hair tangled, face thin. She looked up at him with wide eyes, clutching a twig doll. "You got a little one," he said simply. "That is reason enough." Odessa looked down. "Her name's Calla, she's 4, he nodded once. "Wait here." He turned and walked inside the store, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Odessa stared after him, heart pounding. She had not meant for anyone to see her like this, hollowed out, desperate. She had tried so hard to hold it together since her baby boy had passed 3 weeks ago, tried to keep her little girl fed, to keep her safe. She heard the shop door slam and watched the man come out carrying a sack in one arm and a canteen in the other. He walked right up to her and set it at her feet. "Dried meat, beans, bread, apples," he said. "Oats for the child, there's clean water in the canteen." She could not speak. Her throat burned. He looked at her again, softer this time. "Where are you staying?" "Nowhere," she answered, eyes down. "We sleep behind the livery. There is a tarp there." He frowned. "You alone?" She nodded. "What about the girl's father?" Her hand tightened on the blanket. "Gone. Left when I was carrying the boy. He did not make it." The man looked at her for a long moment, then knelt in front of Calla and offered her a small green apple, her thin fingers wrapped around it like it was gold. "I am Oran Thatcher," he said, standing again. "I have a camp a mile out. Clean water, real shelter. I will not touch you, but if you want to come rest, warm up, you are welcome." Odessa looked at him, trying to see past the dust and the grit and the gun on his hip. But all she saw was the way he had looked at her child, like she mattered. "I cannot pay you," she said. "You do not owe me anything." Still, she hesitated. Trust had cost her before. But Calla was already tugging at her sleeve, apple forgotten. "Mama, I'm tired." Oran did not push. He simply waited. Finally, Odessa nodded. "All right." "Just for the night." He helped her onto his horse, lifting Calla gently behind her. He walked beside them as they rode, leading the reins. The sun was low now, throwing long shadows across the fields. Odessa clutched the blanket in one hand, the food sack in the other, and for the first time in weeks, her shoulders eased just a little. Oran's campsite was tucked against the rocks near a stream, with a canvas lean-to already set up and a small fire pit ringed in stone. He handed her a blanket and a clean shirt to change into, then stepped away to give her privacy. That night, they sat across the fire from each other. Odessa fed Calla from the tin plate Oran had filled, watching her daughter eat like she had not in days. "You from here?" Oran asked. "Born in Kansas, came west with my husband. He wanted gold, found a bottle instead." Oran nodded. I was raised in Texas, left young, been riding cattle trails the last 5 years. She looked at him across the firelight. Why did you help me? He glanced at her before answering. Because I saw someone I could not walk past, she swallowed. Most folks do. I am not most folks. Calla fell asleep in her lap, and Odessa tucked the baby blanket around her. She looked up to find Oran watching her, not with pity, but something steadier. Like he was seeing her, not just her situation. You can stay as long as you need, he said. No one will bother you here. Odessa nodded, her throat too tight to speak. That night, curled beside her daughter under the stars, with a full belly and the sound of the stream nearby, she closed her eyes and breathed without fear for the first time in what felt like forever. And a little part of her, the part that still hoped, whispered that maybe, just maybe, something good was beginning. The morning broke slow, with a hush over the land that made Odessa feel like sound had been tucked beneath the frost. The canvas above her glowed pale gray, and she could hear the soft burble of the stream nearby, steady and calm. Calla was still asleep, curled close with one hand tucked beneath her chin, the blanket pulled to her nose. Odessa eased out from under it, careful not to wake her, and stepped into the chill. Oran was already at the fire pit, crouched low, coaxing flame from a bed of coals. His coat was draped over a stump, sleeves stiff with dew. He didn't look up when she approached, but handed her a tin cup, steam curling from it. Brewed with willow bark, he said. Good for the cold in the bones. She took it without a word, wrapping both hands around the warmth. The silence between them wasn't awkward, not sharp or uncertain, but something waiting. Unrushed. He added a few pieces of wood to the fire, the crackle growing as warmth spread out in a circle around them. You sleep? He asked. Some, she said. Better than I have in a while, he nodded. That lean-to holds up well in wind. Built it last winter when I thought I might stay. You didn't, Oran sat back on his heels. Didn't see the point then, trails kept calling, but I came back. Sometimes a place sticks in your mind, even if you try to shake it. She sipped the drink slowly, letting the taste settle on her tongue, slightly bitter but not unpleasant. You planning to ride out again soon? She asked. Not sure, he said. Hadn't made plans past this week. You thinking to move on? Odessa looked toward the trees, their bare branches stark against the brightening sky. I don't know, don't have anywhere in particular to go. You got kin? No, she said. Just Calla now. He didn't ask more. Instead, he stood and walked to his saddlebags, pulling out a slab of cornbread wrapped in cloth. He broke it in half and offered her a piece. You always carry food like a supply wagon? She asked, accepting it. Learned the hard way, he said, sitting back down. I don't like depending on strangers. She chewed slowly, the texture dry but filling. Seems like you made an exception yesterday. Oran looked at her, eyes steady. That wasn't about trust, that was about doing what felt right. She didn't reply to that, wasn't sure how. From the lean-to, Calla stirred, a soft whimper rising as she pushed herself up. Odessa crossed to her and crouched down, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. There's cornbread, she said quietly, and water. Calla rubbed her eyes, then crawled into her lap, head against her chest. She needs a coat, Oran said behind her. I've got an extra wool shirt. It won't fit perfect, but it'll keep the wind off. Odessa looked back at him. You don't need to, I know I don't, he said. Still offering. He walked to his pack and returned with the shirt, soft with wear. Odessa slipped it gently over Calla's arms, rolling up the sleeves, and the child leaned into it, comforted more by the warmth than the fit. You ever work stock? Oran asked once they were seated again. Not directly, she said. Helped with feed and tack when my husband took jobs on ranches. Why? I could use another set of hands, he said. I've got 2 mares and a mule that need tending. Not hard work, just steady. I'd pay in food and shelter. Odessa looked at him, uncertain. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. You're careful, you watch more than you speak. And you didn't jump at the offer, she weighed that. And you'd let a woman work your animals. I'd let a person who can do the job do it, he said. A long pause stretched between them before she nodded once. All right, I'll try. He gave her a small, satisfied nod, then stood. Come on. I'll show you where the feed's kept." She followed him past the fire, through a patch of frost-stiff grass to where the animals were staked near a stand of scrub. The mule eyed her warily, but the horses let her approach, ears flicking. "She's got a sore leg," Oran said, pointing to the bay mare. "Been favoring it since last week. I wrapped it, but she's still limping." Odessa crouched slowly, brushing her hand down the mare's flank. "She's straining the joint. You've been pushing her too hard." "Ran from a storm across the flats," he admitted. "Didn't have much choice. She'll need rest." "Cold compress if you have creek access." He looked at her. "You know animals." She didn't answer right away. "I know what it's like to be worn down and walked too far." Oran didn't smile exactly, but something in his expression shifted, softer at the edges. "I'll haul water," he said. "You do what you think's best." She spent the rest of the morning tending to the mare, showing Calla how to brush gently along the belly, how to speak low so the animals didn't startle. Oran watched from a distance, doing chores of his own but always within sight. Later, when she was washing her hands at the stream, Odessa looked up and saw Oran kneeling by the fire again, carving something from a strip of pine. She hadn't noticed the knife before, or the way his hands moved with such quiet precision. "What are you making?" she asked, stepping closer. He held it up, a small horse, rough-shaped but with care in every line. "For Calla," he said. "Figured she might like something to carry." Odessa took it gently. "She will, thank you." He met her eyes again. "You're not a burden, Odessa." She looked down, the words catching her off guard. "I didn't say I was. You didn't have to." She let the quiet stretch between them, then nodded once and walked back to her daughter, tucking the carved horse into her hands. And when Calla's face lit up and she hugged it close, Odessa felt something shift inside her like a door unlocked without her noticing. She didn't say anything. But she watched Oran longer this time, and the watching didn't feel like caution anymore. By the end of the second week, Odessa had learned the rhythm of the camp. Dawn meant kindling the fire with dry moss and pine twigs, boiling creek water in a blackened coffee pot, and checking the bay mare's leg before Oran even stirred from his bedroll. Calla, still bundled in the too large shirt, would help feed the mule with steady little hands, eyes sharp with quiet pride. They hadn't spoken much of the past since that first day. Oran didn't seem to expect stories, and she had no interest in giving them. But the silences between them had shifted less like closed doors, more like quiet hallways between rooms not yet explored. That afternoon, as the wind picked up across the gulch, Oran motioned her toward the brush line. He had a coil of rope slung over one shoulder and a rolled hide under his arm. "Need your eyes on something," he said. Odessa followed him past the ridge where the camp sat, into a ravine that curved like a shallow bowl. The sun hadn't reached the bottom yet, and the air was colder here. At the edge of a cottonwood stand, a snare trap lay slack, a broken twig beside it. "Been finding tracks here mornings," Oran said, crouching. "Too wide for rabbit, maybe fox or badger. Thought I'd try for it, but the bait's been taken clean." Odessa studied the disturbed leaves. "You ever trap for hide?" "Used to," he said. "Mostly for meat now. But I miss the extra coin." She knelt beside the trap, brushing aside frost. "You're setting it too shallow. Whatever's taking the bait is stepping wide." He looked at her sideways. "You know trapping." "My uncle trapped muskrat along the Arkansas," she said. "Taught me how to follow sign when I was still small enough to slip under fence wire." "You surprise me, Clarke." "Most men didn't stick around long enough to be surprised," she said, straightening. Oran adjusted his hat, eyes on the tree line. "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed. "You're not." They reset the snare with a deeper loop and fresh scent, then walked back the long way, cutting past a patch of dry switchgrass where Oran picked a bundle of seed stalks and handed them to her. "For the girl," he said. "She might want to make something." Odessa brushed her fingers over the brittle stems. "She's been asking how to braid." "I think she wants to copy your reins." "She's welcome to try." That night, after Calla had fallen asleep curled against the saddle blanket Oran had given her, Odessa stayed by the fire, legs drawn up, watching the flames flicker along the stones. She says your name in her sleep, Oran said, sitting across from her with his hands around a tin cup. You're in every dream she has. Odessa nodded once. I worried I'd lose her too. He didn't ask how close she'd come. Just stared into the fire like he could see something in it that hadn't formed yet. You ever think about settling? She asked. Not just stopping for a while but putting roots down. I did once, he said. Near Lano had a claim and a girl who smiled when I walked through the door. She died in the fever summer of '69. After that, I didn't look back. She studied him in the shifting light. I'm sorry, he shrugged. Sometimes I still hear her voice when the wind catches just right. Odessa was quiet a long time, then she said, I used to hum when I rocked the baby. Just to keep him calm. After, I kept hearing it, even when the wind was still. Oran reached across the fire, not touching her, just close enough that the warmth bridged the space. You don't have to talk about him, he said. I know, she whispered. But it's the first time anyone's let me remember him without turning away. They sat like that until the fire burned low, the dark pressing close but not unkind. When she rose to crawl under the canvas, she paused, turned back. You're the first man who ever gave without asking. Oran looked up. You're the first woman who ever stayed when she didn't have to. She held his gaze a moment longer, then ducked beneath the flap. Inside, Calla stirred as Odessa lay beside her, one small hand reaching out in sleep. Odessa caught it, held it gently between her palms, and let the stillness settle. Outside, the wind shifted through the brush, and Oran fed one last stick to the fire, watching the sparks drift upward into the cold night. He didn't try to name what was growing between them. He only knew he'd wait as long as she needed. By the third week, snow had begun to gather in the creases of the hills north of camp, pale and dry enough to sweep aside with your boot but steady enough to stay. The horses had grown woolier, and Oran started checking the sky more often, reading the color of the clouds like scripture. That morning, Odessa knelt near the lean-to, patching a small tear in Calla's wool shirt with thread pulled from the hem of her own skirt. The needle was dull, but she worked slow and even, each stitch tight. She didn't notice Oran approaching until his shadow crossed her lap. There's a widow east of here, he said, crouching beside her. Keeps goats, sells milk and cheese through the pass. I was thinking we might ride out tomorrow, trade for some. Odessa tied the thread off with her teeth. What do we have to offer? I've got a rolled hide, some tallow, and a few cured strips left. Maybe she'll take the mare's old bridle too. She looked up. You mind me coming along? He rested his forearms on his knees. No. I figured you'd want to. She reached for Calla's small coat, brushing away a pine needle. She'll need to stay warm if we're going that far. I'll wrap her in the wool blanket from my roll, he said. We'll go slow. The next morning they left just after dawn, the girl tucked between them on the saddle, wrapped up so tight only her eyes peeked from beneath the folds. The trail east was narrow, winding between stands of juniper and scrub oak, the ground frozen stiff in places where the sun hadn't yet touched. Odessa hadn't been on a horse since Calla was still crawling. Her thighs ached before the first ridge, but she said nothing. Oran rode solid behind her, one arm steadying Calla when the trail dipped. Halfway there, they passed a cluster of old homestead ruins, just a chimney and 2 stone footings left. Oran slowed the horse. This place used to be full of children, he said. You'd hear them laughing all the way down the gully. Then the drought hit. Odessa didn't ask what happened. She could see enough in the way the chimney leaned. The widow's cabin sat low against a rise, smoke curling from the stovepipe. A line of goats stood huddled near a fence made from scavenged wagon wood. The woman who opened the door had gray in her braid and a shotgun resting against the frame, but her eyes softened when she saw Calla's face. They traded quickly. The woman accepted the hide and the bridle, and in return filled a burlap sack with a round of hard cheese, a tin of curds, and a jar of thick yellow cream. As they were mounting to leave, the widow touched Odessa's arm. You staying with him? Odessa hesitated, then nodded once. The woman's eyes moved to Oran. He came through here last spring, didn't speak much, looks like he found his voice. Odessa glanced at him, then back at the woman. He listens more than he talks. That's rarer than gold, the widow said, then turned back inside. They rode back slow, and by the time the sun dipped behind the high ridge, Odessa's shoulders were tight with cold. Oran passed her the canteen, his gloved hand brushing her arm. "You tired?" he asked. "Just stiff. We'll walk the last stretch, let the horse breathe." He lifted Calla down, then reached for Odessa's waist. She hesitated, then let him help her. His touch was firm but careful, and when her boots hit the earth, she steadied with a hand to his chest. "You all right?" he asked, quiet. She looked up at him, wind tugging at the ends of her hair. "I thought I'd forgotten how it felt to be treated gently." The corner of his jaw tightened. "You should have never had to learn otherwise." She stepped back, not because she wanted distance, but because she was afraid of wanting less of it. That evening, after supper, Calla curled in her bedroll with a piece of cheese clutched in her hand, already half asleep. Oran was oiling his saddle straps, fingers working through the stiff leather with practiced ease. Odessa sat beside him, legs folded beneath her, the fire throwing light across his knuckles. "You ever think about raising stock?" she asked. He shook his head once. "Cattle don't hold still long enough, but goats or chickens maybe, something that doesn't need chasing." She smiled faintly. "I always liked the idea of hens. Something about gathering eggs in the morning feels steady." He glanced at her, then back at the strap. "You think you'd stay if there was steadiness?" Odessa didn't answer right away. The fire popped between them and a breeze shifted through the brush behind camp. "If there was steadiness," she said, "and kindness and room for a little girl to grow up soft instead of sharp." "I might." Oran set the strap aside. "I've got a pair of hands and a patch of land I've been meaning to clear. If you wanted, we could see what grows there." Her breath caught, not because of the offer, but because of how quietly he'd made it, not a demand, not a question that begged. Just a space opened, waiting for her if she chose it. "I wouldn't come empty," she said. "I wouldn't want you to," he said. She reached for the tin cup near the fire, hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. When she drank, it tasted like ash and pine, but it settled warm in her chest. "I could start with a garden," she said, "if the ground's soft enough." "I'll break it for you," he said, "soon as the frost lifts." She looked over at Calla, her face tilted toward the firelight, mouth parted in sleep, then back to Oran. He was watching her, not with expectation but with hope held quiet and sure. She leaned forward, just enough that her shoulder touched his, and stayed there. And in the hush that followed, the world felt like it might hold after all. The last of the frost lifted in early March, peeling back from the creek banks in thin, curling sheets. Oran had started clearing the patch of land behind camp by then, using an old grubbing hoe and his hands when needed to pull at the stubborn roots. The soil beneath was dark, rich from years of leaf fall and never being turned. Odessa watched from a distance at first, Calla balanced on her hip. Then one morning, without a word, she took up the second hoe and worked beside him. They didn't speak much while they did it, but the rhythm of it, the scrape and lift, the thud of roots tossed aside, settled something inside her that she hadn't realized was still restless. By the end of that week, they had carved out a long rectangular bed and fenced it with pine rails Oran had split himself. "You want rows or mounds?" he asked, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. "Rows," she said. "I've got onion starts and some dry beans. If we can find seed potatoes, we'll be set through next winter." He nodded, eyes following the line of the fence like he was already imagining it green and full. That night, while Calla slept in the lean-to, Odessa sat beside him on the log at the fire's edge, her hands wrapped around a cup of creek water. She watched the way the firelight played along his forearms, the way his boots rested flat and easy in the dirt, no tension in his shoulders, no hurry in his breath. "Your claim in Lano," she said. "Did you leave it behind?" "I sold it," he answered. "After she passed, I couldn't bear the rooms. They held too much sound." She looked down at the rim of her cup. I used to think I'd have a house with a porch, one with a swing. What stopped you? Too many starts and stops. Too many men who wanted the porch but not the woman who came with it. Oran's voice came low. I don't want part of you, Odessa. She turned to him slowly. I want the whole of it, he said. The grit and the grief. The hands that work the soil, the mouth that holds back more than it says. I want the part of you that still hums when she rocks her child to sleep. Her eyes burned, but she didn't look away. And what would I have if I gave you all of me? He reached out, touching her wrist lightly. The kind of life where no one walks away. She set her cup down and moved closer until their knees touched. Her fingers found his, and she held on not like someone bracing against a storm, but like someone reaching for solid ground. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. Spring came in earnest by the first week of April. Calla collected wildflowers and pressed them between pages of Oran's old trail ledger. Odessa planted beans, onions, and cabbage, kneeling in the garden bed with dirt streaked across her cheeks. Oran built a coop from scrap wood and bartered for hens with a passing trader who needed a mule harness mended by the time the first shoots broke through the soil. Oran had begun sketching plans for a cabin. He laid them out on a cloth near the fire, rough pencil marks showing a single room, a loft, and a porch with 2 narrow posts. You sure about the porch? He asked, glancing at her. I'm sure, she said, brushing her hair back. And I want that swing. He smiled, then not wide, but deep, like something long dormant rising to the surface. Calla was the first to call it home. She did it the morning they hammered the last plank into the porch floor, standing in the doorway with her doll tucked under her arm. This is ours now, she said. Odessa stood behind her, arms folded, and nodded. Ours. They kept the lean-to for storage and summer shade, but they slept in the cabin from then on. Oran built the swing before the first frost of the next year, and Odessa sat in it every evening, Calla on her lap, watching the sun fall behind the ridge. Late that winter, after the snow had settled thick across the roof and the garden lay blanketed in silence, Oran came in from checking the chickens and found Odessa at the table, writing names on a scrap of cloth. What's that? He asked, shaking snow from his coat. She turned the scrap so he could read it. Oran Thatcher, Odessa Clarke, Calla, you ready? He asked. She nodded, folding the cloth once. It's time. They rode to the circuit preacher who passed through the valley once a season. The man married them beneath a cottonwood that hadn't yet leafed, but stood tall and bare against the blue sky. Calla carried a bundle of dried flowers and stood between them as they said their vows. Odessa didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She only looked at Oran like she'd known him longer than the land itself. I'll stay, she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. I won't run. He touched her face with the back of his hand. You don't ever have to. They kissed, and the preacher tipped his hat, and Calla clapped her hands once before leaning into Odessa's side. That night they sat on the porch swing, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in one wool blanket. The chickens settled quiet, the fire inside the cabin burned low, and the stars came out clear over the ridge. Oran leaned his head against hers. I never thought peace would have a shape. Odessa tilted her face toward his. What does it look like? He looked at her, then down at the child curled against her hip, then out across the field where the cabbage would rise again in spring. It looks like this. She smiled, and this time it reached all the way to her eyes, and so they stayed. Through rains and dry seasons, through lean years and full ones. The garden grew. The porch swing aged. Calla learned to read, to milk goats, to hum lullabies to her own little one, born in that same cabin nearly 10 years later. Odessa and Oran grew older together, hands worn, love steady. They never left the land they found each other on, and they never had to.